But speaking of a seam, when you get these two parts together here, see if I can get these tabs there. When these parts go together, you're actually going to notice that you do have some seam lines in the corners where those parts mate. I think on this back side here, you're going to be able to see it a little better. You got one there, and then you got one there. So the way that we're going to address this is using a lot of Mr. Cement S there to see if we can fuse those seam lines together to get that plastic all welded together, so that we can get our sponge stick and sand it very similarly in those corners like we did for the putty. Now, if we don't get a good welding job amongst those seams and we still have a little bit of an indication there, we're going to come in there with some Mr. Surfacer. We've got Mr. Surfacer 1500 here, and if that doesn't fill all of the remaining seam line that's left after our welding job there, then we're going to come in with the 500 and thicken it up a little bit. And same thing, just like with the gray putty, we're just trying to feather those edges. If you can tell on these pieces, I left the putty in there. I didn't remove it completely, and that's ultimately what you want. You applied it. You want it in there, so don't sand it to the point where you take it all away. And that's the same thing with the Mr. Surfacer. So let's go ahead and glue this. And let's see how we go. So I'm going to be very, very generous with this glue, right? I'm going to put it on there thick. I want to get that plastic nice and soft with the solvent that's in the glue. I'm just going to take care not to touch any of it, of course. Get a lot of glue on the other side. Again, really, ultimately what we're doing here is we're trying to soften these seams up so that we can get a little pressure when we mate the two parts, and then hopefully that plastic welds together nicely. Again, being very generous. Both intake halves, you know, get some glue on both pieces. Be generous. Let's go ahead and get these pieces together here. All right, we got our locating tabs. A little bit of pressure. This one, let's get a little better alignment. All right, now let's really apply this glue. We're going to apply it on the exterior, and again, being very messy, using an incredible amount of glue here so that we can get some fusing going on. And then it's really important down in these recesses. What I'm doing is I'm putting a lot of glue on the end of the applicator, and I'm letting it drip all the way down that seam. Doing it on the back side as well. Going ahead and brushing it. And as I'm holding it, I'm gently putting a respectable amount of pressure so that we can really meld that plastic together. And that's going to help minimize the amount of Mr. Surfacer that we actually need to use. So I don't want to put too much pressure on there, because if I do, I could essentially really squish it and change the dimensional characteristics, so that when you put this with the mating part that it goes on, it might not have the fit that it was designed to do. So, firm pressure, but I wouldn't be cranking down on this so that you're really changing it significantly. All right, so we got our intakes here, and we're going to do a little bit of sanding. One thing that's going to help me too is kind of using my applicator for the putty to stiffen up our sanding stick a little bit and help me get a little bit of pressure down in the middle of our piece here. So we're just going to go ahead and get some good sanding on these seam lines just to see where we're at. Do we have any recesses left over of these seam lines? And we're going to make sure that we even get all the way to the front portion of this intake as well. And again, having this spatula, so to speak, is allowing me to press down on the front so that I can make sure that our sanding stick is conforming to the corner shape of the intake. Just kind of feeling it as we go, and yeah, I'm feeling a pretty deep recess there, which is kind of unfortunate because then that means we're going to have to use some putty just to really get these intakes absolutely seamless. So let me keep sanding, and then once I'm done getting it to where we can go, we'll apply the Mr. Surfacer. Okay, so we have our intakes here. Did all the sanding that I could do, and feeling inside there, yeah, I can tell that when I put some paint on there, there are going to be some seam lines, which is kind of a bummer. So we'll resort over to our Mr. Surfacer 1500. Haven't used this in a while, so I shook it up off camera, but I'm going to shake it up a little bit more. Might need to use a stir stick. Now with Mr. Surfacer, they've got the 500, the 1000, the 1200, 1500. So the higher the number, the more viscous it is. As you can kind of tell, this is pretty liquidy in there. All right, getting a nice amount of Mr. Surfacer in there. I'm not gonna be too stingy about how much I use. Now, when I was running my finger across these seam lines, some areas were pretty prominent, so I've got a feeling that I'm going to have to use some Mr. Surfacer 500 in there. That's the thicker stuff, and it'll fill the gaps a bit more. Now the thing with Mr. Surfacer is, if you can tell here, I'm using some smooth strokes, brush strokes on the outside, keeping it wide to try and feather the Mr. Surfacer out. And that's going to help me minimize the sanding and the feathering that's needed on the edges. So don't be shy. Use quite a bit. And it's really going to do a number. So let's wait till this dries. We'll do a little bit of sanding, and if need be, we'll get on some of the 500 Mr. Surfacer on there, and then I'm pretty confident that we'll have this completely seamless of the ejector pin marks and these seam lines.